long as you don't have to go to Florida.
Ellie and Dale.
How about you, Dave? How would that? Could you just like
A little bit of everything.
see what's there?
Let's see what's there. Yeah.
Over at Trinity.
So I have
Rob and I
Naples. I have a Naples trip and a hotel booked.
Water and sewer there.
No flights yet, so I'm screwed.
One
I
more
gotta book my
minute.
flights, otherwise everybody booked. What do you
About
want?
time you show up. Come on.
We can pretend that that clock's
Oh,
active.
we went through the
Figure anything out.
scare. Oh, it's just so many. It's true.
Well, just out. Yeah. Got a good budget. We just need to cut a quarter mil
right,
a night.
showered
We'll be
today.
fine.
So that was interesting.
Being agreeable are done.
That's like 3 times.
I'm
Good
teasing.
evening.
Very bubbly.
Couple minutes behind schedule here, but we're all here, so call the Appropriations Committee meeting for October 9th to order. Let's call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Here.
Alderwoman Talaco. Here. Alderman Meyer.
Here.
Alderman Hancher. Alderman Bach.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderman Bratt.
Here.
Alderman Gebhardt.
Here.
Mayor Nurbin.
Here. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, just gonna jump right in with budget overview. The budget team will walk us through it.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and members of the Appropriations Committee. Night 2 of our October marathon here in Mequon, and tonight we're here to review the proposed and recommended budget for fiscal year 2025, which begins next January 1st. As was shared with all of you during the budget workshop meeting that we held at the end of August, this is a significant undertaking on behalf of the city staff on an annual basis. And certainly the guidance and the policy direction that we get from the council, not only during this part of the year, but on a year-round basis, is very helpful in assisting us in fashioning the spending plan for the coming fiscal year. And while you see certain members of the staff up here that comprise the budget team, and we do, I would say, a lion's share of the work that goes into producing the document before you this evening, we are supported by all of the department heads and all of the men and women that stand behind our department directors in these efforts in terms of putting together a spending plan for the year, but also, more importantly, administering that spending plan in a very responsible way over the 12 months, which an annual budget covers. So I just want to point out that we are supported here by the men and women of the city of Mequon, and tonight's budget will mainly focus on supporting their efforts as employees and stewards of the city in their daily task of delivering service to the community. So let's jump right in. And as I look at it, and I mentioned it's marathon season here in Mequon, but as a runner, but not a marathoner, October is kind of a month for marathons. We just had the Lakefront Marathon here in Milwaukee. I know the Chicago Marathon and the New York Marathon are coming up later in the month. And you know, if you're running a marathon and you want to place well or win the race, you got to catch up to the leaders. And this budget's a little bit about getting caught up. And so we're going to be doing a citywide survey coming up in 2025. And we're also going to right-size our property revaluation, which is significantly out of whack. We're at 77%, as we shared with the Appropriations Committee at our workshop meeting in August. once you get caught up, you have to keep up with the competitors that you're racing against. And so in this budget, we have wage and benefit adjustments, both on the health insurance and the salary side, that we think will keep us competitive with the surrounding communities with whom we compare ourselves against. And we also have added funding for the library and the Southern Ozaki Fire Department to keep those organizations moving forward. And lastly, finishing the race, we've got pay study recommendations that we're proposing and recommending be included in the budget for 2025. And we'll be finishing up the spending and the allocation of ARPA dollars for the coming year. As you know, December 31st of this year is the deadline by which we need to allocate or contract all of those monies. So catching up on a couple of things, keeping up on the important side, the people side of what we do, and then finishing up some of the programs we've been administering over the last couple of years. This is a slide that I shared during our budget workshop meeting, and as I mentioned at that meeting in late August, this was going to be a pretty straightforward budget, a maintenance of effort or a meat and potatoes budget focused on salary and benefits and taking care of what we need to take care of from a mandate standpoint. And some of that is the result of the fact that we have so many different projects going on that we talked about at our strategic planning workshop back in May. And these are directly resulting from the strategic plan that we put together a couple of years ago and that runs through next year, 2025. And I won't list out or talk about each of these projects, but these are the things that we talk about monthly at our committee of the whole meetings. These are the things that are on the agendas, and these are the things that we're looking for the council to interact on and take action on as we move forward here throughout the remainder of 2024 and into 2025 and likely 2026 on some of these projects. So while this might not be the most exciting or sexy budget that you all will approve at some point, we've got a lot of other major, substantial, significant, impactful projects going on behind the scenes that relate to capital and policy efforts and initiatives. This is also a slide that we shared at the budget workshop meeting, and these are really the guiding principles that help direct the work of the budget team and the senior staff. You know, when we get together on an annual basis to put together the budget, we want to fulfill salary and benefit obligations for the employees across police, fire, public works, planning, finance, all of the other functions that we serve here in city government. We certainly want to address operational or compulsory budget increases whenever and wherever possible. And over the last number of years, we've been able to boost capital funding on a pay-as-you-go basis by over 50%. We also want to preserve revenue capacity into future years so that we have some flexibility in terms of budgeting on a year-over-year basis. And then, as has been the case over a number of years, this group has entertained supplemental funding requests when resources allow. So these are really the priorities that we hold dear in terms of putting together a responsible spending plan that meets the needs of the organization going forward. So now we'll just jump into sort of broad overviews regarding the revenues and the expenditures that comprise the budget. These tables were included in the transmittal letter that sits on top of the proposed budget that was distributed back on October 1st. And as you can see, taxes are proposed to go up by just about $360,000 or just under 3%. That's the biggest source of revenue we have, property taxes, and we are wholly reliant upon that source of revenue to keep our operations going on a year-over-year basis. Not much change in the state revenue category. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick in the shared revenue. We saw a big boost in that number last year, and that is now tied to inflation. So we should see continued increases in that number going forward year over year. Intergovernmental revenue is going up. Some of that is related to the corresponding payment that the state is now making to municipalities for the elimination of the personal property tax. So that item is actually going up by about $160,000, and some of that will offset the property taxes, personal property taxes, that we're no longer collecting starting next year. The other revenue categories are largely unchanged. You can see they're in the 1 to 3% categories, or percentages, changes rather. And then interest income is going up by $50,000. And here's the interesting story behind this number. We have conservatively budgeted for interest income over the last couple of years as interest rates have been high, north of 4 and 5%. We've actually more than doubled the amount of interest revenue that we've been taking in over the last 2 fiscal years. So we see some room, even though interest rates are starting to tick down a little, to bring that number up to correspond more with what we'll probably see in the 3.5% to 4% throughout the better part of 2025. So all in, revenues are projected to go up by about $640,000. As we mentioned during the workshop meeting back in August, net new construction is up less than 1%, which gave the budget team about $210,000 to work with, without putting any upward pressure on the tax rate, currently at $3.13. The closure of tax increment financing district number 2 provided an additional $58,000 of revenue, which would not impact or provide upward pressure on the tax rate. And we had about $360,000 worth of excess levy capacity because we didn't raise the tax levy last year. With the new shared revenue coming in, the tax levy actually was reduced by $23,000 last year. So we had some excess levy capacity that we were able to incorporate into the spending plan before you here this evening. As I mentioned, shared revenue is increasing, road aid is increasing, and in interest income. Some of the decreases, we continue to see a downtick in the connecting highway aid that we receive from the state. It's been about a $130,000 drop over the last 3 fiscal years. From 2023 now to 2025, that's gone down about $130,000, which is not insignificant. So we have to incorporate that into our spending plan. Court penalties are also reduced by about $20,000, and we have left future unused levy capacity of about $66,000 going into future years. So we didn't max out on the full available levy dollars of $357. We've left about $66,000 on the table for spending either this year or into future years. On the expenditure side, really the 2 big gainers here are salaries and benefits. Kind of aligning with my earlier comments, you'll see salaries are going up just over 3%, and benefits and other staff costs, which are retirement contributions and health insurance, are actually going up more than the wage piece of the expenditure side of the ledger. Materials and supplies and facilities and plant are being reduced slightly, and the other categories, purchase services, equipment leases, the library grant, are all in the neighborhood of 2%, and the equipment leases, while going up 7%, the amount actually is negligible relative to the budget. Last night you approved a levy increase for the fire and EMS department that we now operate jointly with the village of Thiensville. That is going up just over 5%, and you see the number reflected there. So all in, expenditures and revenues are both projected to go up 3.6% for the coming fiscal year.
That health insurance is crazy, it's just, it's just out of control.
And that's the very first bullet point on this next slide, Alderman Bach. Health insurance premiums have gone up 9%, just under $190,000. So when you juxtapose that figure with what we had available under net new construction, there wasn't really a lot of other money to go around without having to adjust the tax rate upwards to incorporate other spending into next year's budget. Employer retirement contributions are going up just north of $77,000. The increase on the rate for general employees is less than 1%, while the protective services employees rate is going up by 4.5%. So that's driving that $78,000 number. Protective services is police and fire. In this case, in the city budget, police. Annual wage adjustments are just under $400,000. That includes cost of living adjustment for the Mequon Police Association, as well as non-union employees above the 50th percentile in the city pay plan. And it also includes step adjustments pursuant to the recommended pay plan that we shared with you back in April for any staff that are below the 50th percentile. This is the third and final recommendation that was included in the compensation study that we performed and completed in late 2022. As you'll recall, we amended our pay plan going into the 2023 budget season, and then we provided a longevity adjustment for certain employees who have been with the city for a period of time as part of the 2024 budget. Now we want to move employees who are at the lower end of their pay grades up to the appropriate step underneath the 50th percentile. So this will be, if adopted, varying for certain employees based on how many years they've worked with the city. And just to refresh, Assistant City Administrator Shinneman shared with the council last spring 8 steps below the 50th percentile that employees would move into on an annual basis to get to the midpoint. And then above the midpoint, it's based on a cost of living adjustment and an annual performance evaluation. So you sort of learn how to swim. I'm using the running and the swimming analogies here. You learn how to swim during your first years with the city with predictable cost of living step adjustments, and then once you've proven yourself and you've gained some experience, you're in the deep end of the pool and you're expected to swim and perform based on merit. Operating budget expense reductions, we actually went through as a budget team and took $53,000 or $54,000 out of the budget. We looked at multi-year trend analysis across many of the divisional and departmental budgets, and were able to reduce certain line items by just over $53,000. And we were able to also incorporate some compulsory increases relative to mandates, state or federal mandates that we are otherwise required to meet from a reporting perspective, and the fact that we are opening a new facility at Lemke Park, which will require electricity, natural gas, and septic well pumping for the waste that's generated at that facility. So we've taken a very careful look at all of our major line items, and really, you know, if there's any slide that summarizes what's changing in the budget for 2025, these are the numbers that are driving the plan. Alderman Strelchak.
Just because we usually do a deeper dive into some of the bigger figures each year, just to gain a bigger understanding or just simply express the reasoning for the public watching. Health insurance premiums up 8.9%. Obviously, we've seen that across the board in private business as well as within the city. This is kind of a year-over-year major increase, and it's a budget hit each year. What is the driver for this? Question number one. And then, are we seeing a potential for tapering or other opportunities to start mitigating this moving forward?
Well, I'm going to bring Assistant City Administrator Shinneman into this question and this conversation, because he is the city's liaison to the Employee Trust Fund, which oversees the state health plan. He probably has some insights that he can share relative to the increases that we've seen over the last 2 years. But if you saw the Wall Street Journal today, there was an article in the paper that indicated that average health insurance increases being absorbed by companies over the last 2 years in the private sector were averaging 7%. So 7% last year, another 7% this year. We're seeing a little higher number at 8.9%. And prior to last year, when we had to incorporate an 11% increase into this year's budget, we had been clicking along through the state health plan with increases in the 3 to 4 to 6% annual range. I would say if I were to average it out, it was probably in the neighborhood of about a 5% adjustment per year, going back to 2015.
Great.
So we've seen an uptick, and Justin, can you provide any additional insight
Yeah.
into what's happening at the state
What's
plan
happening
level?
and,
So, and
yeah, why is it happening and what can we do to start maybe looking at ways to offset this?
so this, for the state plan, we're lumped together with all other local government employers in these plan options we buy into. And they have indicated on whole, because everyone's in the same pool together, that they've seen additional expensive claims they had not anticipated in their forecasting, plus their investments not perform as well over the last year, which is what they have indicated is the major driver behind the increase for next year. The state has indicated that they're going to be examining their plan options for cost control measures going into next year. And we've signed up to be a part of any conversations that come forward with the state to make sure that if there's something to be waited on, we have a chance to say our piece. And at the same time, it's on the city to probably do some due diligence as the state's doing its own.
Are there any, like, tracking, like for work, I get a premium credit for wearing my watch and taking so many steps in a day and doing health-related activities. Are there any options or anything being discussed that we're not currently exercising?
So we do wellness initiatives. It's called Well Wisconsin. It's put through the state through the health insurance to help mitigate costs. But that does not translate back into employer savings.
Okay.
So I've got something to add, and I think we should bring it up when we have a chance to talk with the people from trust fund. The other half of that, why the costs are going up, and that was true for last year and is true for this year as well, is they're not doing as well in their investment portfolio. They are investing like drunken sailors at times. Earlier this year, the ETF bought over $150 million of Bitcoin as it was nearing record highs as an investment for the ETF. They are investing very risky. It's crazy. It's crazy what they're engaged in.
Sure.
And I can't believe there aren't hearings at the state capitol
Yeah.
for how they're treating that bucket of money. That should be a predictable, stable investment. That's nest egg status. It's way more risky far more risky than we invest the city's money here. I don't understand why they're doing it, but that's what they're doing. You can go find the articles earlier this year when they bought all that Bitcoin. It's nuts.
Maybe send a state, a city letter challenging their investment policies and asking them what their policy is moving forward.
It makes me wonder what our state elected officials are doing. They should be asking those questions. I would recommend members of this body write their elected officials and ask them, why are we getting hit with 9 and 11% increases when you're investing so wildly? That's got to stop. I know healthcare is going up, but that's probably only half the story here.
Well, I'm from the country in District 1. I'll just show up in my truck. Hi, guys. Let's chat.
The sad thing is that you have this ripple effect then that goes down to employees, because then their contributions have to increase, and then their 3% cost of living is not a real 3% cost of living, and that affects it trickles down. So that's
It's
kind
a double whammy.
Yeah, it's a double whammy, and I don't know. Do they do? It probably doesn't affect you, but is there any incentives to like a spouse or partners who have plans that are good plans that to get family members off of the city plans? It probably doesn't operate that way because it's not a self-funded plan.
Yeah.
But so like you can't do any spousal surcharges or things like that where you could lower the cost because it's all one big group. I'm guessing you can't do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, they tie our hands on some of the things we can do. We did do some investigating last year into our own potential, I call it cash in lieu of insurance with the city, and ran into roadblocks that
Yeah.
prohibited us from doing it. But if going into tune and examine how it's prescribing and managing its benefit options, that we'll have to be just as diligent to make sure that we land on a good note.
Because there are ways to, save money on that, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
when you're part of that group, you're kind of handcuffed.
It'd be
Really
fantastic
are.
to have like an employee plus spouse option, because right
Yeah.
now we can only do single or family.
Yeah.
The state limits our ability to give employee that middle ground even.
Yeah.
Yeah, these last 2 years or budgeting cycles have been particularly challenging, and, one number I'll just point out. For benefits and staff costs, we have now eclipsed the $4 million mark on an $18.5 million budget. So if you do the math, our benefit costs are eating up a huge portion of our overall operating budget.
Well, it's historically been that way, It's just when costs are increasing at 7.5% and, really all that we can feasibly increase is, from staff salaries is less than that, people are moving backwards, and that doesn't feel good as a team leading within a community, right? I know the private sector's dealing with the same thing. Can you remind me what I know that when we joined, I forgot what the parameters were, when we joined this state insurance, there was like a barrier to get in, and then we needed to be in for so long, and if we left, then we were at risk of not being able to go back. Are we at a point where, maybe an eval this year of private insurance might benefit, our taxpayers as well as our employees?
Stay tuned on that one.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember how that works. If you even bid it out and request your actuarial data to get bid, you're kicked out automatically.
That's what I was asking about, because I knew there was some weird quirk with it. So they invest our funds in Bitcoin and all these other wild investments, yet,
Shackle your hands with the threat of
yeah,
not
as soon
being
as
able to
we
get back
question
in.
them, we're booted out like a bunch of children questioning the mafia.
We're gonna get there.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Good question. It's on our minds. All right, shifting gears over to capital. And this is mostly pay-as-you-go capital, but I've worked in some debt-funded or debt-financed capital as well onto this slide. As I mentioned, pay-as-you-go capital is up over 50% over the last 10 years. Requests for 2025 were just under $6 million. That's up almost $850,000 from a year ago. For 2025, our combined capital spend will be just under $4.25 million. That'll include annual debt service of $2.75 million, and then almost $1.5 million in pay-as-you-go capital. We're looking at a debt issue in 2025, early next year, which will include roads that we typically borrow for on a 3-year basis, as well as the construction of Lift Station E. Now, those funds will be sourced from the sewer utility directly. They won't impact the general fund, but it does comprise a portion of the overall debt issue that we'll be pursuing. And there may be other projects, smaller in nature, that may get included in that bond issue, depending upon where conversations go over the next couple of months. As was mentioned at the workshop, we are in a very strong position from a debt issuance standpoint. We currently have no debt beyond 2033. We're already talking about 2025, so we're well within a 10-year window whereby all of our existing debt will be retired. So there's light coming through for us to take on additional debt for longer-term projects. We talked about that in depth at our workshop meeting back in May. We've also got the ARPA projects, which are underway. LMS, you heard about that last night. The brush site was previewed at our August committee of the whole meeting. And Lemke Park, that facility is hoping to wrap up sometime around Halloween or shortly thereafter. So making progress on the facilities and the infrastructure front. So here's just an overview. This was also in the materials that were distributed back on October 1st. Mostly very status quo relative to the major categories that have comprised our pay-as-you-go capital funding plan over the last many years. Public Works and Police are the big beneficiaries here, Public Works in particular. Fire, there's also money allocated to a similar tune from the previous year. Emerald ash borer and tree replacement is going down marginally. We're bumping parks up by a couple of $1,000s. And IT computer replacement continues along at $10,000 into next year. Also included is $125,000 for pool repairs, pending the outcome of those discussions and decisions that'll probably be made here later in the year. Yes?
Can you elaborate what the big increase in the pool expenses for next year? Like why, just to open up the pool next year, why is it almost $40,000 more?
Well, last year in 2024, we allocated some additional dollars for the repair of the HVAC system here in this room. That was a one-time supplemental allocation for 2024. In 2025, we are recommending a one-time supplemental allocation of $125,000 for pool repairs, depending upon the pool that the city will be operating for use by the public in 2025. As was outlined in some previous conversations, there are some major repairs that would need to occur for us to open this pool if we continue to own and maintain it next year. If the city were to look at an alternative option for a pool, there are also identified upgrades and repairs that would need to take place for us to open and maintain such a facility. So,
This is a fair way of looking at it.
this is our spending
Wash,
plan, and,
yep.
and really, this is the time to get that money
you.
earmarked. Thank you, Alderman Parrish.
Emerald ash borer, are we gonna see that taper off? I know that when we first addressed that, those were critical trees that were gonna fall into roads or places where people were at risk. We hired on forestry service people to help address that, in addition to the dollar amount funded. The dollars amount funded were to an outside professional service where there were more risky trees and things like that. So I guess my overall question for you is, you know, is that where we need to be investing now? And, you know, kind of, is that gonna continue?
For the time being, yes. And I would anticipate over the next several funding cycles, you will continue to see requests for emerald ash borer removals. Because the trees we've taken down, and I mentioned 27,000 ash trees at last night's meeting, were probably the low-hanging fruit. And now the ash trees that we need to get to are the trickier ones, the ones that are not as easily accessible. And so the cost per tree removal is probably gonna be a little higher with some of these more challenging sites and locations. But as I've had conversations with Director Lundin and Superintendent Geese, we're hoping to maintain a level of funding in this category long-term because we've taken down so many trees on public property that have died. And eventually, we'd like to replace a lot of those trees that we've lost. And so tree planting and tree replenishment will probably be the next phase we get into once we're done taking out all the hazards and the trees that otherwise need to come down. Director Lundin, anything you'd like to add?
Correct. Unfortunately, as Will mentioned, we're to some of the more precarious trees. We have them falling on vehicles and parks, on hopefully not people we haven't tagged yet, but they're a lot harder to get to and a lot less accessible because they're not roadside. So those are a lot more expensive, and your EAB policy requires a one-to-one replacement, which means we have 27,000 trees to plant.
Is our crew I worked on a tree service in college, so is our crew qualified now with the years of experience that we have there where we can maybe rent a bucket truck and offset some of these costs?
We have a bucket truck. We remove about 5, well, depending on the year, we remove anywhere between 1,500 and 5,000 trees.
They're working, that's a lot.
They are. And certainly, these allocations are subject to annual review and ultimately approval by this body. So, you know, if there's a desire to move money around, You are the ultimate authorities.
I'm in support of this, and I know the ongoing need is there. My question is, I thought that the dollar amount allocation was to address the riskier trees early on. And I was just a little surprised to see that was continuing, because I thought that was gonna shift more to a staff level or, people on our crews that would be handling some of these other ones. So I thought we were through the tricky phase of what's going on.
Well, I think we were through what, and I'm sorry I don't have the policy in front of me, but what we identified as the high priority trees, that's not what they're called by policy, but, those that were likely going to fall within the right of way and potentially on vehicles as they otherwise passed. But again, those that we're getting to now aren't necessarily not a public safety hazard. It's just a different kind of public safety hazard, and short of, having to close some of our nature preserves and trails and parks, that's where we're getting to, where our bucket truck can't access it because it's not on a road, that we're having to get to either more specialized equipment or just more time. But I did want to come to say that we do acknowledge that we need to provide an EAB update, and that is on our work plan to come through to give more detail on and a more specific plan, both in terms of removals and replacements.
That's great, thank you.
Alderman Parrish.
A couple more points as it relates to the EAB update. I recall a few years ago that the Parks Department, can you come up, because I have a couple questions. I have a couple questions for you. A couple of years ago, didn't we have like a GIS program we were implementing with the trees so that you could actually have like concrete data with?
Well, correct, except the initial tree inventory that was completed by Davies Tree Service in 2014, I want to say, was only for right-of-way, and so it didn't include all of these trees in the parks.
Got it.
So we do have what's called hyperspectral mapping that kind of is like a heat map for trees that shows which ones were ash, but it's harder to distinguish which are on public property versus private.
Great, that wasn't my real question for you, but I did want to clarify that, thank you. Can we just talk quick about, well, first of all, I was really disappointed that the Parks has a $5,000 decrease in funding, so I just wanted to point that out. I know capital is up, but isn't the operating down about 5,000? I'm just going off memory. What I really want to prioritize is with the opening of the freeway ramp across from the west side of the parking lot. We've at the Parks Board and at the city level, we've contemplated what to do about, that new configuration essentially, and perceived danger. And staff is recommending that we look at closing the west parking lot and essentially expanding the north parking lot. And we were assured that it would be soon, and that I just want to make sure that the funding is built into here. I realize it's coming from a few different accounts. There's stormwater management, there's landscaping, and then there's the road program to possibly move the parking lot. So I just want to make sure that the funds are there to get this project done in 2025, which is in the top 5 for the capital improvement list. And also just wanted to clarify, are we decreasing the operating funds for the parks by 5,000 or?
Hopefully Will's getting to.
Did I misread that? Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully Will's getting to that answer. In the meantime, I can address the
Thank you.
project at Catherine Kearney Carpenter Park. And yes, you are correct, and somewhat of a trick question. There is money in the capital accounts or pending. The road program includes, it's actually a right-of-way asset management capital fund now, which also includes parking lots. So there's not yet funding, but we are anticipating your approval of a borrowing that would include the funding for that parking lot work. And then both the combination of the Park and Open Space Master Plan that is nearing completion right now, and some of the guidance was to address that potential, that elimination of the west lot, expansion of the east or north lot, and then what to do with the area where that west parking lot is going to be removed.
Thank you. So on schedule for
And then,
2025.
and then Park and Open Space Board will, as they historically have done, designate how their capital funding would be used. Most of you recall, we anticipate being down just about to zero by the end of this year with the Lemke Park Pavilion construction. So that 77,000 will be really all they have in cap to implement the prioritization as they so request your approval.
Thank you.
In response to your question, Alderman Parrish, the parks budget is going from $645,000 in 2024 to $662,000 in
Oh, good.
2025.
Thank you. I misread that.
And that include, well, I don't remember if that number includes, but I know the recommendation includes, obviously, we have some increased costs for Lemke now with electric, gas, and the holding tanks.
And on that point, are you adjusting the projected fees for Lemke? I know you're showing a
They-
lot of increased expenses, but wouldn't there be increased revenues?
You may recall Parks comes through in the spring with a request for a fee schedule amendment related to the field management contract, and at that time, we will request an adjustment to those Lemke fees as well.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the library and the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department. These lines were captured in some of the summary slides we reviewed just a few moments ago. But just to provide a little additional background, over the last 3 years, the city has allocated $240,000 in funding to the library, including almost $90,000 in recurring revenue, as well as $150,000 in ARPA funding. The 2025 request received from the library, Director Mushin Young, who is here with us tonight, was $25,000. We've been able to allocate just over $18,000 to the library for next year. And as was covered during the workshop meeting, one of our goals for next year is to engage with the Village of Thiensville on a new funding agreement to be addressed early next year. On the SOFD side, we just had this before us last evening, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. But just as a reminder for those of you who do not serve on the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Board of Directors, Ozaki County provided area fire departments with ARPA money over the last 2 years, 2023 and 2024, to help support hiring of full-time personnel across the county. SOFD was the beneficiary of some of those grant dollars to the tune of over $600,000 during the last 2 fiscal years. Those grant funds are expiring, and then the increase will go to cover wages and health insurance for our budgeted 15 full-time staff members, as well as a COLA, or a cost of living increase, for our paid-on-call staff. And we have a significant number of paid-on calls that support our operations on a daily basis. Here is a slide that just provides a very, very high-level summary of the ARPA spreadsheet that was included in the budget packet. My compliments to Assistant Finance Director Marie Kaiser for putting together a much more detailed report than maybe you've previously seen relative to the way in which the city has expended the $2.5 million that we've received in ARPA funding. We think that's going to be very helpful as we go out and do our grant reporting to the U.S. Treasury Department when we get to December 31st of this year. We have accounted for every expenditure down to a penny, and we think that's going to be helpful, not only managing through the end of this year, but in terms of compliance going forward. You can see here the three major categories where we haven't spent down most, if not all, of the monies. Include the land management system, which we talked about last night, a civic campus master plan, which the Department of Community Development is currently working on an RFP for, and we hope to get that out on the street and with a contract award before the end of the year. And then the brush site, and we're anticipating possibly even a contract award as soon as November for that project. So Many of the dollars are in the process of working their way down to zero, and our goal is to have that remaining column at zero by December 31st of this year. In terms of taxpayer impact for the budget before you this evening, as I mentioned, the tax levy or the property taxes are increasing by just under 3% to the tune of $360,000. Last year, the levy was reduced, not increased, by just under $24,000. The 6-cent tax increase that staff is recommending would take the city's rate from $313 to $319, and on a home valued at $450,000 here in Mequon, which a year or two ago, I'm not saying right now, but a year or two ago, might have represented the median home price in Mequon, that would result in about a $26 increase or 1.8% increase in the city's portion of the tax bill going into next year. We're still waiting on state manufacturing values, which if they go up, will make these numbers a little better from a city perspective. We expect those next week, so we'll be incorporating those into the final budget that we'll bringing to the council for adoption. The sewer levy is going to remain flat, so that could actually result in a little bit of an offset for those residents living in the sewer utility district, because the levy is not going up, and that will likely result in a lower tax obligation for those residents. And as mentioned in previous Appropriations Committee meetings, 1 penny represents about $53,000 of additional spending or revenue relative to the tax rate. Here's a slide that we shared at the Appropriations Committee last year. It's been updated with the current numbers for 2024, and these are the communities that we surveyed as part of the compensation study that we performed back in 2022. I think we surveyed about, if my numbers are right, about 24 communities, both here in the Milwaukee area, further south towards the Illinois line, and then out west towards Madison. And you can see our current tax rate of $3.13 per $1,000 of assessed value is the second lowest amongst all of these communities. Pewaukee is the only one ahead of us in these standings. And looking ahead, we go through this long process of developing the spending plan for the next fiscal year, but it's hard not to think about next year's budget and what we're going to need to do, and it's never too early to begin strategizing on how we can go at next year's spending plan. One of the things that I would like to do with the council next year, in lieu of another strategic planning workshop, is engage in the development of a long-range financial plan which will govern how our operating budget is formulated over the next 5 years heading into 2030. And we would propose to work with our consultants from Ellers, who helped us reimagine our sewer utility funding model earlier this year, so that we have a blueprint for how we need to adjust spending or adjust revenues over the next 5 years, and we can be a little more strategic in our approach versus the sort of 1 year or every year we get together and we have a couple of meetings and we decide the spending plan for the next year. I'm hoping also to work with our legislators, as I did last year on the upcoming state budget, to continue to advocate for increased funding for municipalities. In my role as current president for the Wisconsin City County Management Association, I've had some conversations with area legislators already about the fact that I'm available to testify or meet or provide information on behalf of all of the municipalities across Wisconsin if questions arise or proposals come forward relative to local funding for local governments. I think we're going to probably take a look, like we did with our general liability insurance and our workers' comp insurance, our insurance program a couple of years ago. We bid that out, and we realized $100,000 worth of savings. I think we're at the point where we're going to lean on our new finance director, who's gone through a similar process with some of her previous employers, and do a private sector look at our health insurance program. And have those numbers and have that analysis available, so when the state comes back to us in July or August of next year and puts a number in front of us, we're gonna have some information to compare that to. And that may involve some conversations along the way with the council to bring you along and apprise you of our efforts relative to that initiative. We've got a number of residential development projects in the pipeline. Highland Meadows is currently under construction. Phase 1 and Phase 2 of Swan Ridge Farms should be going next year. Those developments are 83 homes and 37 homes respectively. And then we have Phase 7 and Phase 8 at the Enclave also coming through. And there are other smaller, Gazebo Hills comes to mind, some of the smaller subdivision projects. There are probably 150 or more single-family homes either on the drawing board or going to be constructed over the next 2 to 3 years. So in terms of building permit revenue and net new construction, I think the light's gonna shine a little brighter than maybe it did this year with interest rates being so high. We also may want to consider alternative revenue sources. We've had some conversations at the strategic planning workshop about some of the options that are available. That could probably dovetail very nicely into the long-range financial plan conversation. And then we have our management intern doing an energy baseline project where we're measuring our energy usage across facilities, equipment, vehicles, everything that uses gasoline, electricity, natural gas, you name it. We're developing a 5-year baseline to understand where our spend is occurring, what our spend is, and maybe helping us to identify opportunities for reducing those costs going forward. So, more to come on that.
Hey, Will,
Yes?
question. How much of the, actually, I'm gonna come back to it in a little bit. Thank you.
So, here's my last slide, and thank you for your patience as I've walked through a number of these slides here this evening in advance of your conversation. We're here tonight. If necessary, we can schedule another Appropriations Committee meeting either later next week or into the 3rd week of October. Typically, we have not had to do that, but we'll obviously see where discussions go this evening. We have a public hearing notice that's due to the newspapers on October 22nd. So we have to wrap up our work here as an Appropriations Committee by October 21st. We're in the process of scheduling the sewer and the water budget meetings. We talked about that at the staff meeting here this morning. It looks like we're gonna be able to pull the trigger on a date here in the next day or so. I don't have any announcement on that tonight. And then we'll publish the public hearing notice on October 24th in advance of the council's formal consideration and adoption of the budget on November 12th, where we will conduct the public hearing and hear from any interested residents or parties from the public. So, thank you again for your time and your attention here this evening. We're certainly happy to answer any questions, and Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I see Alderman Bach with his hand up.
I just had a quick operational budget question since you brought that up. I thought that, I saw the professional development line item in there, and I thought that was really low, but maybe it was just one department. It was like a small number, but I thought for an organization this size, it probably should be more professional development, but maybe I was wrong. Do you remember that number or the?
It's probably in the neighborhood of about $55,000 across the organization.
Is that pretty similar to other municipalities?
A couple of years ago, when the fire department was still under the city's rubric, that number was closer to $85,000.
Yeah.
So that number took a hit when SOFD broke off. In a perfect world, we'd be advancing that number or increasing that number over time. And if it weren't for this health insurance, I'd be putting more money in that line item category.
That was one question. And then I was just curious on how, like, the budget managers kind of manage non-exempt employee overtime. I imagine it probably varies on department. So in other words, like, I'm sure the snowplow drivers or whatever that is, the highway department, you probably figure out an average number, and sometimes it's below and sometimes it's high depending on the winter. But some of the other ones, you know, like building maintenance and fleet maintenance, I saw that that overtime goes up. So is there I imagine each manager kind of is in charge of how they allocate that overtime? But that's just one way you can save money, but.
Yes, overtime is managed at the departmental level, and as you correctly point out, in the public works space, much of that overtime spend relates directly to snow and ice removal efforts, which we see late in the year and then early into the following year. On the police side, you know, we have shifts that we need to cover on a 24/7, 365 basis. Oftentimes, we will have gaps in the schedule due to various reasons. Somebody's ill and somebody needs to get called in. And then we have other instances in the police department where we have an incident or a crime that has occurred or a case that needs to be resolved. And so that may require extra time at any point during the day or the week where people need to be pulled off or they need to stay beyond their normal working shift and do the work necessary in order to clear that case.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So hopefully that's helpful. And then, you know, we've got smaller overtime allocations across some of our other divisions and departments, and that relates to generally work that occurs outside of the normal business day or normal work schedule. You know, we provide support for certain special events like the Taste of Mequon, Gathering on the Green. Those are weekends and evenings and other efforts, community-wide and otherwise, that require additional work outside of the normal workday.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Makes sense.
Any other questions? Alderman Parrish.
Yeah, I couldn't find the cost for the reassessment again. I know we approved it recently. Do you recall what that is that we're funding this year?
We had Les Aarons, the city assessor, at the Finance and Personnel Committee meeting in July, and he ran through the 4 available options for the committee. The recommendation from the committee was to do the second of the 4 options at a cost of $225,000. And that money is going to be sourced from the interest income that we've been able to generate off of our ARPA allocation of $2.5 million.
Sure. I guess I know we don't like going into fund balance, but well, first of all, you know, it's concerning having an increase. I know it's very modest. You know, you've done a good job trying to keep it down, but with like the school referendum happening and all the other pressures, I mean, it's still going to be disappointing, obviously. So I'm just trying to look at some other ways to mitigate it, at least for this year. And one of them is, I feel like we're overfunding the pool just to keep it open. That's one thing. But I'm wondering don't we use fund balance when there's like almost a rate of return on it, if you will? It feels like if we were to use some fund balance for sourcing it instead of the interest income, that perhaps that's a way to lower the increase. That's one of my first thoughts. I know we don't like using.
I think what Will said is that the reassessment process will be funded from the interest from the excess ARPA funding, so it's not baked into the.
It's not coming out of
It's
there.
not coming out of this. It's coming out of the money we made on the federal government's money while we
From the ARPA
held their
money.
money
Okay.
until we spent their money.
Okay. Got it.
And we're hovering right at the 11%, which is right between the uprights of the goalposts of 10 and 12%. So there's only roughly around, rough numbers, a couple $100,000 till we go out of compliance with our own policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think another point that's not highlighted in the slide deck, but is in the back of the packet, not every compulsory budget increase, which are ones that we don't have control over but are going to go up, not all of them made it into the budget. There's north of $100,000 of stuff that we know is going to go up that isn't baked in. So that's I took that as an internal challenge the team took to try and manage that throughout the rest of the year. If I'm interpreting that incorrectly, please correct me, but,
Your interpretation is correct.
okay.
You know, we're really looking to deliver on the results of that compensation study that was done a couple of years ago. And I will share with you that it's been made known with me directly as the city administrator that there are employees that are watching what the city does relative to that pay study. Because there was a pay study done maybe 10, 12 years ago that wasn't really implemented. And, you know, we do a fair number of studies around here, consulting studies, et cetera. And some of the recommendations are implemented, others are not implemented. And I can tell you as a representative of the city staff, there are folks that have their eyes on this. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to walk the walk.
I guess my point was there's some things that they're listed as compulsory, but they're not in the budget. You can see on those pages of the packet which ones they are, and there's a lot of them.
Yes.
So it's going to be managed by doing like they usually do and watching budgets like a hawk throughout the year and trying to fund those, but they're not baked in. So if they all can't be mitigated and they all hit, that part that's not in the budget will come out of fund balance. So we don't want to find ourselves caught short and be out of compliance with our own policy at the end of the year. There's not a lot of margin left. I mean, thanks to the state jacking up health insurance, they've used almost every penny of our increase in shared revenue we got last year. So thanks, you kicked the can down the road a couple of years, but we're right back in the crunch time again. So, yeah, it's not a great message that we're running out of available levy cap, but when we have discussions about future initiatives like opening up a new industrial area, that's why I'm heavy on those, because you need the additional revenue. And things like additional industrial, they generate a lot of revenue and don't have a lot of expense. So that's good for our budget in general. So a plug for future things we may work on there as well, but that's why they're necessary in my opinion. So.
Speaking of additional revenue, I happened to go look at the Thiensville budget today, and I saw that they're increasing the fiscal agent fee by, I think it was 10% or something like that, to $8,500. And I guess it looks like they're plugging their budget with this fee, and as you know, we don't charge for it. I assume they haven't replied and won't. But it's a lot of money, and I'm just wondering, I don't want to offer it up, but since we do it complimentary for SOFD, why don't we just do it? I'm not offering it, but like, I'm wondering what the scope is for it, and maybe we could save the library some money by doing it, and they can go plug their budget, that $8,500 some other way, and we could save Thiensville, and we could save the library that money. So I don't want to offer up a service that is a can of worms in terms of overburdening our staff. But if it's just like payroll processing, come on. So it does feel like there's a little bit of, they're charging kind of at the expense of our taxpayers on a couple of things, and this is a really good example. So I'd be curious just what's involved with that fiscal agent fee, and maybe we could just take it over this upcoming year, and they can't use it as a way to fill their budget unless there is a real expense to it, then I get it. But we have a real expense for being fiscal agent for SOFD, and we don't charge. So just curious for more information on that.
So Alderman Parrish, you're on to something that we have talked about at the staff level. And these discussions have involved staff from the library. And our plan at this point in the fourth quarter of 2024 is to engage further on that point as we get into discussions regarding a longer-term funding agreement between the village and the city early next year.
Okay.
There may be some opportunities, as you've pointed out, for the city to take a larger role, but we want to explore those opportunities as part of the broader discussion with both the library and the village.
I get it. But when they're increasing it by 6.25% from 2024 to 2025, it looks like a revenue source to me. So that's all I have to say about it. Thank you.
And they're well aware it's our point of irritation. He's brought this up, what are we going on, a year and a half?
This is maybe my third year, so, but
Yeah,
we'll,
third.
again, our staff has done a good job communicating our intentions, and I know this is small dollars, but, we take care of, they're down to 9% contribution. We're paying 91% of the library now. So, to Will's, I mean, we'll have some good negotiating points when we redo the agreement this upcoming year.
So to your point, Alderman Parrish, I've put together these figures on a slide. I think you're probably singing from the same song sheet here, but if you look at Thiensville and Mequon's population, based on the 2020 census, there's a breakdown of about 11.6 and 88.4. With the funding increase that we're proposing for next year, we are gonna be at the 91 percentile, percentage, rather, from a funding standpoint. I think this puts us in a very strong position going into these conversations and these negotiations to advocate for a different methodology and to advocate for Thiensville in particular to step up and to take on their fair share. And right now, the funding agreement relies on population. It relies on circulation numbers relative to what the library experiences on a year-over-year basis. And it relies on assessed value, property values within the communities. Well, we all know Thiensville's landlocked. Mequon has a lot more sand upon which to build, so to speak. Our sandbox is a little bigger. And that assessed value ratio is not gonna work in our favor long-term. So a per capita measurement, such as you see here, is probably the best and fairest way to go, because the library is located right next door to Thiensville. It's not located right next door to a fair number of Mequon residents. I mean, if you live in Thiensville, you're a half mile, maybe a mile from the library. If you live in Mequon, you could be 5, 6, 7 miles from the library. You're not that close. So those are some of the points that we're gonna wanna revisit in order to ensure equity long-term for the city and the village.
Do they track like the circulation on how many?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Director Mushin Young is here, and I'm sure she could probably add a lot of data points to what I've just described. I don't
Yeah,
know that
because-
we're looking to get into a long conversation here.
Right.
Because if we're gonna negotiate, we don't wanna necessarily talk about that now.
Right, but that would be another that would be a good data point too, in addition, because really it comes down to usage,
Yeah.
more than geography. I mean, it's population and usage.
So your points are well taken, Alderman Parrish. Thank you.
I'll add a little bit of color to highlight the need to have a different deal put together, because there's no mechanism built into the deal to keep up with inflation. I just looked at some numbers in the last couple of days. I went back to 2014 and looked at the allocation of money for the library, just on the Mequon side, and it's been kind of flat on the Thiensville side. But 11 years ago, it was $1,000,048, and with the number proposed here for next year being $1,150,000, that's only an 8.8% increase, or on an annual basis, 0.738% year-over-year increase. That's very far behind inflation.
I would just say, though, that in recent years, our increase has been substantially greater. I
Oh,
mean, past councils have not
All of that
treated
increase
the
has come in the
library
last 3 years.
funding-wise the same as this council or recent ones.
There's been nothing until the last 3 years, you
Yeah.
are correct.
Plus, we gave the ARPA money as well to
Yes,
support them.
yep. But the funding, the point is not what we're doing now. The point is the funding formula is broken beyond any useful, you can't repair it, it's busted. If you compare that to CPI, the library's budget has effectively shrunk 27% in 11 years against real inflation, so.
I just want to add that the library staff has been trying to, see savings costs, to go through their budget and see what they can do to save money in the library, so it becomes more and more taxing as the rate of increase gets smaller and smaller.
Was that a Appropriations Committee joke?
But I just see the inner workings of, you know, what it takes to meet the financial needs of the library. We're doing everything possible. They're doing everything possible to reduce the cost, and they're grateful that Will and the staff has been working with them to meet those needs. I mean, without staff, it would have been much more difficult, and we definitely appreciate the concern and care that the city has paid to the library and understanding their situation. And I'd like to thank publicly the staff for helping the library, because I am the representative from the city there, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
I think the spirit of maintaining the community resource, the burden of that has landed on Mequon residents, and I think that's our frustration, kind of moving forward. And then, you know, the kicker is that they bill them for the books, so they've got 9% minus what they're charging them to do the books. That is probably, the majority of that's probably already allocated for within their city budget, just from a payroll and check writing standpoint in general. I don't know how much of that is actual cost that they're seeing. So their percentage has actually gone down based on that. And, you know, while we're maintaining and doing the books for SOFD, you know, as a good steward to make sure that, you know, that community resource is available for our community as well as theirs, you know, their hands are, you know, pulling from the budget of the library. And, you know, we've heard multiple times at our council the need for additional funding for the library and how they're struggling to, you know, keep up with maintenance and other things. So, you know, I'm gonna reiterate, you know, like early next year as we work on that agreement, let's push hard on that and not let that slip. I enjoy hearing Alderman Parrish's point be brought up and, you know, at multiple meetings, but I'm not looking forward to hearing it for another 3 years.
Can we not just say no to Thingsville, that we're not gonna give you an increase to do the payroll this year?
That's their budget and their decision on what they're
So
gonna
they
charge.
can bill us at whatever?
No, they're
or
not
we-
billing us, they're billing the library.
That's why my idea was, why don't we just take it over? And then they can't count on it as a revenue source in this year's budget. Let's just do it, unless there's a real time and cost for the city, which we don't have that answer tonight. So I'd like more information on what is the scope of work for the library's fiscal agent.
That's
how
a really good, we both sit on F&P, that's a really good discussion for next month's meeting. Just an overall brief, it doesn't need to be a full deep dive, big project, but ballpark, what would it cost us to do that? Then we can make some decisions moving forward on how we wanna approach it.
Got it.
It's a good lever to use in negotiations. Alderman Bratt.
So we really appreciate this presentation tonight. First budget here, so very enjoyable for reading.
Oh, good.
I do like the idea of a long-term planning, you know, meeting on about a long-range items. I really think the need to be focusing on alternative revenues. Like if we look at the wheel tax, you know, our road costs do not go down, they only go up. Dollar only goes so far. So I think if we can focus on something like that, that would be very helpful. I think Brian stole all my points on the library, but I also think that, you know, we have a lot of real nice stuff here for what we pay for as a tax rate. It's people in other communities are not so lucky, but we also need to preserve what we have. And so I think we need to think also about partnerships, whether that be on the state level, you know, like I look at data looking at how public sector healthcare costs in other states. Like you have the 3 top ones of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Hawaii. Now, what makes those state pensions a healthcare plan so much better than ours. We're ranked 21st in the nation, you know, right in the middle. So with that, we come with ammo to our state legislature, our local reps, who are a very diverse bunch, all over the spectrum. You know, maybe they can help us, you know, help us in all these other communities, both in the county and throughout the state, find ways to make some savings. Also think of partnerships, you know, for sustaining the park system, like whether it be tree planting with MMSD, they are very into that these days. Solar options for we energies, you know, it's a lot of ideas, but definitely worth exploring. I also don't want to lose the fact my first meeting that I sat through for the committee as a whole before I became a member was on the rezoning possibility of the central business district. I know there was discussion about having a new one on the west side. It'd be great to keep the initiative on that. Like, what are we thinking of for that land? Because they don't make more land. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions related to the budget?
Just the only kind of other thing that's been kind of a talking point in previous budgets was facilities maintenance. This budget with the facilities maintenance, are we addressing our issues? Are we on a run to failure plan that's increased over years previous?
Run to failure,
Depends on the building, I'm
I
sure.
wouldn't necessarily characterize it that way. Admittedly, I don't think we're putting enough towards upkeep of our current city facilities, but I'm also comforted by the fact that I think we're pursuing a plan relative to facility replacement that dovetails nicely with the fact that we've actually shrunk our facility footprint significantly over the last 10 to 15 years. And we no longer own the water utility building, the sewer utility building, the Logaman Center. We've consolidated public works. We now have many less facilities to take care of.
Yeah, just as a point of discussion for everybody here, you know, I've maybe vented on this in the past, you know, to be strong fiscal stewards to the taxpayer dollars, one, you want to spend the money as conservatively as you possibly can, and then the other thing you want to do is try to prevent a need to spend more money by not addressing issues as you move forward. So that was the sole purpose of my question. And it sounds like we're on track, and I know some of the conversations that we're having that are offsetting areas that we were looking to invest in facilities.
And lowering our operating costs relative to maintenance and repair. And I think that's where staff is directing its efforts here in the near term. And maybe someday there will be some corresponding offsets that we'll realize relative to those advancements.
If we execute our plan on all the public safety facilities in the coming years, the biggest maintenance liability will be the building we're sitting in right now.
Yes, yeah.
Which is great. Just, again, just double checking to make sure that we're on pace with that.
Yep.
As a talking point.
You'd probably see that number up if we weren't wrestling with the
I'm sure we would.
23% increase in health insurance.
Yeah, the pool investment is one of them, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Any other questions, or is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
We can't adjourn.
Motion, what can we do?
It's not debatable, so please take that back.
We don't
We
get
have
out
to-
of here
we have
without
to
recommending
approve-
this to the
we're approving
council.
this tonight?
Which is us too, but,
Motion to approve.
Second.
so motion to a second to approve as presented.
As presented.
Any comments or questions on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye?
Alderwoman Telako,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Bach,
Aye.
Alderman Parrish,
Aye.
Alderman Brett,
Aye.
Alderman Gebhardt,
Aye.
Mayor Nurbin.
Aye. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, I'll say that now. Motion to
Second.
adjourn.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned and Dale can get the trap shooting on time.
I do.
Thank you all.
Hey,